This video is going to talk about how to determine the key points of a parabola when something is in standard form. Of course, standard form is when you have a quadratic equation when it is written in y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So in our example problem, we see that we have y equals x squared, so that a is technically 1, plus 2x minus 8. You see everything is adding here. There are no parentheses for multiplication. It is not in factored form. So this is standard form. So you have these steps that you see. Number one step is to factor. Now the reason we need to factor is because that helps us to find our x-intercepts, which is the two very important points for your parabola. Once you have it factored, you're going to use that factored version to determine the x-intercepts. And an x-intercept is when y is equal to 0, which means we get to use the zero product property. You also need to find your y-intercept. That is when x is equal to 0. So that's always the case. So you can just plug 0 in for x, plug it in, and then solve for y. So you have your points there. Number 4, you want to determine the vertex. This one takes a little bit of work, but what you need to do is average the x-intercepts, which you found in step 2. And then once you find the average of that, that's the x value of the vertex, and you plug that in to find y. And number 5, determine the line of symmetry. That's just the x value of your vertex, so through the vertex. And finally, you plot all those points. So let's do this example together when we follow all of these steps. So let's go back to step 1 where we have to factor. As you know, you start with your generic rectangle and your diamond problem. So we start with an x squared in the bottom left and a negative 8 in the top right. You multiply those to get negative 8x squared in the top of your diamond problem, and you have a positive 2x in your bottom. Then you have to figure out the left and the right side of your diamond problem, so that would be a positive 4x and a negative 2x. And then you fill those in your generic rectangle, and you factor out whatever's remaining. These are both x. I'm running out of room here, but hopefully you can see that this is a negative 2, and this is a positive 4. So our factored version is x plus 4 and x minus 2. So what we have done is we have turned our problem in standard form into factored form. So that's one small step, and from standard form or factored form, you should be able to do all the rest of these. And having factored form is really helpful because that helps us find our x-intercepts. So I'm going to use some space up top here to do step 2, which is determine the x-intercepts, which says that when you have an x-intercept, y is equal to 0, so use the zero product property, which tells us to take your factored form, which is now x plus 4 and x minus 2, and you set that equal to 0. Therefore, either x plus 4 has to equal 0 or x minus 2 has to equal 0. You solve for x in both of these, and you get x equals negative 4, and you get x equals positive 2 as your x-intercept. So those are your solutions. Let me rephrase. These are the solutions to our equation from the zero product property. Therefore, they are our x-intercepts. So I'm going to put those in blue here. And so we'll say this is negative 4 comma 0 as a coordinate point and positive 2 comma 0 as a coordinate point, because at every x-intercept, y is equal to 0. That's why we were able to set 0 equal to our factored form. We found the x values that give you that y value of 0. So these are your coordinate points. Now, moving on, you have your y-intercept. So go back up top here, use a little bit of room. So we have step 3. At a y-intercept, you know that x is equal to 0. So I'm going to do this in green. So now I have y is equal to 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 8. And that's what it means if I plug it in. You plug 0 right in for x in our equation, and we still are trying to figure out what y is equal to. And this is actually pretty easy. We have y is equal to negative 8. So our y-intercept is at the point 0, comma, negative 8. Because x is equal to 0, we found our y value, so we have our coordinate point. Now, step 4 is to determine the determine the vertex based upon our x-intercepts. So you have to average those x-intercepts. So I'll do this in yellow here. So I'm going to take the average. That's what I have to do first. Add them up and divide by 2. And so we do negative 4 plus 2 because those were our x-intercepts. And then I divide by 2. So this is negative 2 divided by 2, which is equal to negative 1. That is the x value of our vertex. Now you have to plug that in to find y. So I'm going to plug that -1 back into my equation. You can do this. You can plug your -1 value into your factored form or your standard form. It doesn't matter. Many students prefer the factored form, and so that's what I'll do here. So I'm trying to figure out what y is equal to, and that is if I plug -1 in for x, so that's -1 plus 4, and -1 minus 2. And the reason we do it with factored form is because that's pretty easy math to do here. So you have a +3 and a -3, which is equal to -9. And that is your y value. So now I found the corresponding y value to x equals -1. All right, we're pretty much there. We've got our x-intercepts, our y-intercept, and the vertex. We're going to determine the line of symmetry. And so if you have that line of symmetry that you're trying to figure out, therefore, you're going to just look through the vertex, and it's the x value. So that's x equals -1 because that was the x value up here. And now we plot all these points. So let's start with the vertex actually. So if I start at the vertex, that's at -1, -9, and I put a point down here. And then we also have the y-intercept, which is at 0, -8. We have our x-intercepts, which are at 2, 0, and at -4, 0. So those are those 4 important points. And what's the importance of having your line of symmetry on here is because that goes through this x equals -1 vertical line, right? For a parabola, your symmetry is always going to be vertical. And what that helps you do is find out what your buddy points are. And what I mean by that is all of these points, you take a look, these are symmetrical around that line of symmetry. So there's 3 units here, 1, 2, 3, and there's 3 units here. So those are 3 apart. And also there's got to be a point opposite that green dot. So I'm going to put the buddy point down here. And now you can see you have those points here. You can make a pretty good parabola graph from your standard form. And that's how you do this. So factoring is important. You use the zero product property to find your x-intercepts. You plug 0 in to find your y-intercept. You average those x-intercepts to find your vertex. That is your line of symmetry. You plot those points to find your parabola. Good luck.